Well, good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of Dean Anglin, Dean of the College, Levin College of Urban Affairs, and the faculty here and staff, let me welcome you here to the first in the 2020 Dean's Forums. Let me just tell you briefly that these forums reflect not only the things that our college is interested in and our outreach and engagement with the community, but topics that are relevant to the city of Cleveland, to Northeast Ohio, and the broader region. And what better one to start with than a focus on the upcoming Census 2020, which will touch on almost every aspect of all our lives and the organizations that we work or report to. We have assembled a great group of speakers. Our first presenter is Devante Dickey from the Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, who will be speaking to us for about 25-30 minutes. That will be followed by a distinguished panel reflecting various uses and expertise on the census, including a representative from the U.S. Census Bureau. And I will be moderating that panel, asking them questions, and then opening it up to the floor. By the way, my name is Deirdre McGeehan. I am a professor of urban affairs here. I am a demographer, so I think I've been messing around with the census from when I first graduated with my PhD. So both historical and present, so it's wonderful to see everybody here. Two things I would just like, housekeeping details. First of all, these things don't happen, these forums don't occur without a tremendous amount of organization and help. And I just want to call out Sharon Bliss, who has been absolutely instrumental in doing this. I think she proactively reached out to the Census Bureau and said, we would love to be a partner with you. You may know that many organizations are partnering with the Census Bureau to get the word out, hospitals, teaching institutions, public libraries, etc. So I want to thank her for doing this. And then just as a matter of housekeeping, would you please put your cell phones on silent mode, or as they say in my church, please put them on silent mode or stun, one of the others, so that we, as a matter of courtesy to all our speakers. So with no more ado, I would like to welcome Devante to the forum, and he will give us what I'm sure will be an exciting and informative address. Thank you, Devante.
Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, I'm going to say, again, good afternoon, everyone. Good. If you know me, you know that I have a very overzealous personality, and I know it's 4 p.m., so I'm going to give you some of that energy while we talk about the importance of the census. How does that sound? Perfect. So to start, first and foremost, my name is Devante Dickey. I'm fortunate enough to serve as the Advocacy and Engagement Coordinator for Cleveland Neighborhood Progress. Under Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, specifically under our policy and advocacy portfolio, there's this body of work called Cleveland Votes. So Cleveland Votes, we are a nonpartisan democracy building / equity building entity. And on the screen, you will see just some of the many hats and many areas of concentration that we have. So on the screen, you'll see voter mobilization grantor, technical assistance to develop voter mobilization and strategies. We always conduct our annual nonpartisan voter mobilization training, which is to educate 501c3s and nonprofits on how to, in fact, exercise voter mobilization strategies. And of course, at the last 2 points related to the census, you will see that we are partners in the Get Out the Vote and Get Out the Count campaigns. And we are also fortunate enough to serve as the City of Cleveland's, the City of Cleveland's Community Development Subcommittee, as well as the Cuyahoga County's Neighborhood and Community Outreach Subcommittees chairs. So of course, Cleveland Votes, our theory of change is often around the importance of building equity as well as power shifting. So on the screen, you will see a quote that we usually always indicate and always emphasize whenever we are talking about the importance of the census, voting, or any other form of democracy building. So the quote reads as the following: fundamentally, equitable civic engagement is about leveraging the power dynamics of a place, giving voice to those previously alienated and excluded from the civic process. And this is by the Kerwin Institute at Ohio State University. Once again, the importance of this quote is to emphasize that exercising your civic duty is not about ebbs and flows. We don't need to show out, we don't need to vote, we don't need to exercise your civic duty every 2 or 4 years, but instead we need to have this behavior be normalized and consistent throughout our daily lives. And that is what this quote is supposed to emphasize. So of course, once again, another quote that we always indicate as to why we as Cleveland Votes decided to begin working in this census work is centered around two things. Once again, we understand that we as Cleveland Votes, we understand that we have to build equitable policies in everything that we do. And lastly, we also have to acknowledge and address the historical, structural, and systemic barriers and how they are highly interconnected. So of course, although Cleveland Votes was initially working towards doing voter mobilization initiatives and efforts, we also realized that there was a clear correlation between those who are historically disenfranchised, pertaining to those in the voting realm, as well as those who often have a low propensity to complete the census. And so of course, inevitably, we knew that we needed to take part in making sure that those who also are not unfortunately turning out to vote are also being empowered to complete the census, especially in this next month for the primary election. So why does our community run the risk of being undercounted? So you actually have this map as well as a beautiful another map printed out to your right that showcase the 2010 low propensity. So oftentimes you will hear the terms hard to count communities. And these are the socio-demographics in our city, county, and region that unfortunately have a low propensity to not want to complete the census. So on the screen, as well as to the map to your, on your right, you will see the areas within the city of Cleveland, as well as surrounding suburban areas that unfortunately have a low propensity to complete the census. And to be quite frank, you will see the darker shaded areas are those that, once again, have a low propensity to complete the census. You can look at not only the voter turnout from the 2018 election, you can even go all the way back to the 1930s and address the history of redlining and how all three of these maps, when superpositioned, are once again highly correlating. So once again, we have the term historically hard to count communities. And as I mentioned before, these hard-to-count communities are the socio-demographics, socio-demographics in our city and in our community that once again have a low propensity to complete the census. And on the screen, you will see some of the many hard-to-count communities, unfortunately. They include children under 5, racial and ethnic minorities, limited English proficiency households, immigrants, renters, the transient population, alternative and overcrowded housing units, homelessness, those who are unfortunately incarcerated, as well as, once again, single-parent headed households. So the list goes on and on as to who these hard-to-count communities are. Oftentimes, the reason why we are here, and I want to continue to commend all of us for doing this work, is to address exactly what is on the screen. It is us, once again, emphasizing the importance of the census, us educating, empowering, connecting our fellow community residents to understand the importance of the census. And some of the barriers that you see on the screen are some of the ways that we are trying to mitigate and debunk some of these unfortunate myths. So on the screen, you will see a list of the barriers pertaining to people's fear and apathy for not wanting to complete the census. Some of these reasons include lack of awareness and education about the census, who's counted and how information is used. Of course, we understand that there's a lot of misinformation that is out there. There's a lot of things that are happening instantaneously from the top down. And so oftentimes it's a matter of us educating our community partners, our community residents, to understanding that, as Kate mentioned yesterday, the census data is used in every fabric of our lives, and we need to continue to educate ourselves so that we can serve as translators for those populations and understand the importance of the census. Secondly, you have language barriers. Of course, once again, this highlights the cultural elements of the nuances of completing the census. We need to understand that, yes, it is great for you to have the census. It is very important, rather, to have the census be available in multiple languages, because we have to understand that there's a sense of vulnerability that exists for those who may or may not want to complete the census. So we have to do everything in our power to make those individuals feel comfortable enough to want to complete the census. Once again, as I alluded to previously, mistrust in the government. We have to continue to address the structural, systemic, and institutionalized history of our government, and how, unfortunately, in our history that we have used, or the government has used, census data nefariously. So with that said, we need to continue to make sure that we are, once again, building that sense of trust for our community residents and our community partners to understand that the U.S. Census data is utilized in our everyday lives. Of course, you also have other points such as privacy and cybersecurity. Given, once again, that for the first time in this year, the census will be available online as a self-response, we have to also acknowledge the digital divide, aka digital redlining. So communities that unfortunately do not have the adequate broadband or adequate internet access to even complete the census online, we have to continue to provide the necessary resources, not only to build digital equity, but also to empower them to understand that they too need to complete the census for a multitude of reasons. And of course, you also have other reasons such as misinformation campaigns. As I mentioned before, lack of computer access, privacy and cybersecurity, as we alluded to and we will expound upon momentarily. And of course, just untraditional living arrangements. We have to acknowledge too that the census is one of the most comprehensive surveys that we continue to take as a country. And so we need to make sure that we are addressing the nuances of what it means to in fact complete the census. And once again, what it means to in fact get an accurate count for our community and beyond. So what does an undercount mean for Ohio? Of course, first and foremost, the U.S. Census data is utilized for congressional representation. I'm sure we have all seen a series of articles and reports and podcasts that indicates that unfortunately the state of Ohio, we are slated to lose at least one congressional seat due to the census data and the fact that our state unfortunately our state population is not increasing at the same rate as our other states. So with that said, we are slated to lose one and potentially two congressional representatives. Of course, you also have, how this census data is utilized for federal programs. Some of these programs include Medicaid, SNAP, Medicare, doctor appointments, highways, streets, roads, Section 8 housing vouchers, school district budgets, school lunches, foster care, and of course, low income energy assistance, as well as more. But I also want to emphasize the very last point at the bottom of the screen, which is the fact that historically speaking, Cuyahoga County, we rank third out of all 88 counties in our state in terms of us not completing the census. So in other words, out of all 88 counties in our state, we rank third. So now you see on the screen these two magical numbers. First, you see the $675 billion. That is the amount of federal dollars that is allocated to all of our states. But more importantly, you have most likely seen the number $1,814. The reason why I want to emphasize the latter number is because this indicates that for every person that is not counted in our census, we are slated to lose $1,814 per year. So in other words, that is $18,140 for the next 10 years for everyone that is not counted in our census. And of course, also what I want to emphasize is how the census official start date is April 1st, but of course there's a series of other preliminary actions that will be taken in March that we will address momentarily as well. But of course, I need to emphasize that the census data is utilized to determine our state of Ohio's fiscal year budgets. So of course, our state government utilizes data to determine what funds and how these funds will be allocated for a lot of federal and state programs. And lastly, of course, as I mentioned before, federal agencies use census data such as populations and income to determine how much funds will be allocated to states. And of course, if that means if we have an inaccurate count, that will, of course, dictate and influence how much dollars we will receive, not only on the state level, the county level, the city level, but more granular, the community level as well. So of course, we have to continue to understand the nuances of what it means to complete the census. You're talking about the U.S. Census bureaus and U.S. census takers having to have specific methodologies on how to get an accurate count for our community. So on the screen, you see some of the specific scenarios. These include homeowners, renters, household members with one residence, temporary residents, vacationers, multi-home owners, snowbirds, non-citizens, residents of group facilities, as colleges and universities, as well as a series of other specific scenarios. But the reason why I also wanted to talk about this too is because when we are determining how best to get an accurate count, there are specific strategies and methodologies that the U.S. Census Bureau, as well as our community partners, are strategizing and deploying to ensure that we get an accurate count for each and every one of those communities. So of course, a lot of people always tend to ask, are we required to complete the census? And of course, there are little nuances to this that we have to address. So of course, we are constitutionally mandated to complete the census. And of course, we have also been told that we need to encourage each and every person, because it is required by law, to complete the census. Of course, there is one thing for us to enforce it, but it is another thing for someone to, in fact, want to exercise that right and complete the census. Because, once again, because of the unfortunate realities of what it means to be misinformed or miseducated about the census, we need to continue to tell people that, this is a disservice for you and your community if you, in fact, do not complete the census. So, of course, who is counted? As we always tell people, April 1st, 2020, and I'm going to ask the audience to remember this date, April 1st, 2020. Say it with me. Say it with me one more time. Thank you so much. April 1st, 2020 is the official census day. When I say that is the day where the U.S. Census takers and all the enumerators will be out deploying all of their strategies to emphasize the importance of the census, will be happening on that day. But as I mentioned before, in March, there will be preliminary actions and letters and invitations being sent out to homes and households to, of course, complete the census as well. But if there's any day that I want you, if there's any date that I want you to remember after this forum, is April 1st, 2020. And as we also tell people too, on April 1st, or when you complete the census, because of the nuances of what it means to live in a physical space, you want that the residency where you reside for majority of that year to be the address that you encode or write down as you complete the census. As I mentioned, another point I want to mention is that every household will receive an invitation to complete the census. And then lastly, what I also would like to emphasize is that there are 3 ways to complete the census. You have the internet self-response, that is, once again, happening for the first time in our country. And of course, the latter 2 options are by telephone and, of course, the traditional paper questionnaire. And of course, we have census assistance. As we alluded to before, completing the online census as well as the phone assistance will be available in multiple languages as well. And lastly, the paper questionnaire will be available both in Spanish and English. So of course, we have to address that our country is becoming increasingly more diverse, and we need to accommodate those who have different languages. And once again, the U.S. Census Bureau is doing a phenomenal job providing those platforms as well. So what is the Census 2020 timeline? So particularly on March 12th, to the 21st, every household will receive an invitation to either complete the census via a paper questionnaire or complete the census via self-response, aka online. And of course, March 26th to April 3rd, everyone who did not complete the census will receive yet again a reminder postcard. And then April 8th to the 16th, you will receive a reminder letter once again and a paper questionnaire to once again remind everyone that you need to in fact complete the census. As well as lastly, April 20th to the 27th, a final reminder postcard as well. And I do want to address that some of these days may be contingent upon, are slated to change as well. So how can I respond to the census? As I mentioned before, every household will be invited to complete the census online, by phone, or by mail, beginning in mid-March. Majority of the households will receive an invitation to respond online or by phone, and the remaining households will receive a paper questionnaire along with an invitation to respond online. All households that do not respond will receive a paper questionnaire by mid-April. So of course, I also alluded to the importance of the digital divide and the indigenous redlining. So on this screen, you have a platform that the U.S. Census Bureau provides that pretty much explains to you like how different census tracts and areas will in fact receive either a paper questionnaire or an invitation to complete it online. And if you know me or the history of redlining, you will see that the majority of the east side of the city, aka the historically disenfranchised communities, as well as the digitally redlined communities, will in fact are the green areas. And the green areas are the additionally redlined households, and they are slated to receive both a paper questionnaire as well as instructions to complete the census. Of course, all of the other households, the purple areas essentially, will most likely receive a letter or an invitation to complete the census online. Next, we want to talk about the importance of the census and confidentiality. So the Brennan Center for Justice, there's a quote on the screen by the center that states, "Your response to the 2020 census are safe, secured, and protected by federal law. Your answers can only be used to produce statistics. They cannot be used against you in any way. By law, all responses to the U.S. Census Bureau household and businesses surveys are kept completely confidential." So of course, the U.S. Census workers, takers, and partners and partnership specialists all undergo an oath to essentially state that they will never ever share any of this census information. Otherwise, they can receive a penalty, a fine, or even jail, unfortunately. And of course, there are other Title 13 that also exists that pretty much states that this information cannot be utilized for any federal agency, as well as cannot be shared on the individual level. Because once again, the U.S. Census data is only used to produce statistics. So once again, as I just mentioned, the federal agencies are not allowed to utilize the U.S. Census data for any nefarious reasons. And these agencies include the FBI, the CIA, the Department of Homeland Security, and of course, ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So lastly, as I mentioned before, we as Cleveland Votes, we have been working diligently with our community partners to emphasize the importance of not only awareness building and activating our community residents, but also essentially giving them the necessary tools and resources to have and to be equipped to go into these hard to count communities, as well as those who identify as a hard to count member, to understand to understand how and why the census it matters to them in their daily lives. So of course, with that said, in our efforts for the past 5 or 6 months, we have been working diligently with our community partners to cultivate something called a visually centric campaign. And the purpose of this visually centric campaign is, one, to acknowledge that the unfortunate reality is that a lot of hard to count community residents have a low literacy rate. So we need these campaigns, we need this information about the importance of the census to be visually appealing. But we also need to ensure that our community partners are also able to utilize these same resources to understand what it means to be a member of that hard to count community, so that when they are in fact in those communities, they know exactly what information to share and how, and more importantly, how to share it. So of course, on the screen, you will see a series of about 19, some of the 19 infographics that we, as a Cleveland Votes, we as 2 subcommittees crafted in order to amplify the importance of the census. So of course, on this screen, you see information about what it means when you are living in 44104 or 44106, and essentially some of the hard to count zip codes, and how do you provide the necessary information to those community partners and those constituents to understand how best to deploy the necessary information. So of course, you have a persona, because once again, the purpose of these infographics, the purpose of this visually centric campaign is to personalize and to put a face to the census, and more importantly, to make this content that you see on the screen complementary to the information that the U.S. Census Bureau, the county, as well as the city are all deploying. Once again, the importance of the census is to put a face to this body of work and to make sure people see themselves in the census work. So of course, you see once again 3 of the many identities and persons that are unfortunately in the hard to count community. You also see some data related to what it means to be in when you constitutes to be in a hard to count community. But the 4 numbers that you see at the bottom are some of the variables related to hard to count, some of the variables and resources of what it means to, some of the resources that you will lose if you are not counted. So those variables include health and well-being, food, streets and roads, because once again, all of us use those 4 resources in our daily lives. And of course, if you are not counted, then we are at risk of losing the necessary funding to ensure that we have those resources for each and every one of us. So as I mentioned before, my name is Devante Dickey. I am fortunate enough to serve as the Advocacy and Engagement Coordinator. Definitely look forward to continuing this conversation related to the census, and thank you for having us.
So first, let me introduce the members of our panel. Today, I'm not going to give you all their full biographies. Those are in the handouts. So you've just listened to Devante from the Cleveland Neighborhood Progress. To his left is Dr. Mark Selling from the Levin Urban College. He's a senior fellow and research associate here in the Levin College Urban Affairs in our Northern Ohio Data and Information Service. And next to him is Dr. Nada Martinovic, who is our partnerships specialist from the U.S. Census Bureau, and she has come here from Pittsburgh, was it, or Pennsylvania?
No, I'm actually from Cleveland.
Oh, you're actually from Cleveland. Yesterday we were fortunate enough to have another representative from Pittsburgh. And then to her left is Kate Boren, and Kate is a research associate at the Center for Community Inclusion. So perhaps we could just start as, I mean, Devante, you have touched on quite a few of those things, but maybe the rest of the panel would like to weigh in on just emphasizing why people should fill out the census form. How does Cleveland and this region specifically benefit from survey responses and having as complete a count as possible? So perhaps start with you, Mark, and then work our way down.
Sure. So the question is, why should we
fill out our form?
Why should we do
why,
that?
Why bother? Why do we
Why
get
bother?
vote?
In fact, I've been asked a question in class by a student. You know, there's a lot of data out there already about the population. We get population estimates. We get data about education, jobs, and that sort of thing. Why do we need a census in addition to all that data that comes at us almost every year? The American Community Survey, for example, comes out once a year. It tells us a lot about the socioeconomic characteristics of the population. The news media report about poverty rates every year in Cleveland and elsewhere. So why do we need the census? It's very expensive, happens only once every 10 years. You know, and things change between decennial censuses every 10 years. The population changes, the numbers change. So what good is a one-time every 10 years population count? Well, the answer is that everything else, the American Community Survey, the population estimates that I referred to before, all depend on a good count every 10 years. The ACS, for example, the population estimates data that come out and tell us for every municipality in the country what the current population estimate is. The Census Bureau produces that every year. But they start with the census of 2010 all the way every year up to 2020, and then we have a 2020 census. They use the census to start with, and then they add births, subtract deaths, look at migration, add those numbers all together, and they come up with new estimates of population every year. So we couldn't do the population estimates every year without starting with a good base number. Secondly, the ACS, the American Community Survey, provides all the socioeconomic demographic texture of data about our population and our housing. That data also depends on the population estimates, which start with the decennial census. So without the decennial census, you wouldn't have good population estimates. Without the good population estimates, you wouldn't have all that annual data about our population and our housing. That's one reason why we need the census. There are many other reasons, but that's one.
Are other panelists like to weigh in?
I will also love to emphasize, thank you so much. I think in our body of work as Cleveland Votes, we also emphasize how the U.S. Census data is utilized on the granular level. And when I say the granular level, we're oftentimes talking about, you know, what does it mean when you say you have like potholes or your streets are, you know, not the best, or if there's, if there's a lack of economic or like workforce development in your communities. Oftentimes that U.S. Census data is also utilized for those reasons. So if there's a Starbucks, you know, that will be potentially placed, or a Dunkin' Donuts that will potentially be placed in your community, U.S. Census data is utilized to assess, you know, that community and to determine, you know, and to assess the behaviors of that neighborhood. So of course, if someone wants to place a Dunkin' Donuts in your neighborhood, of course they will utilize census data to say, oh, do we want to provide a drive-through? Because we need to assess whether or not there will be public transit or cars in that space. So once again, we have to understand the nuances and the minute ways in which U.S. Census data is utilized in our everyday lives.
Yeah, I'd love to build on that, and Devante touched on this in his presentation, but I think all of us know people who are, if we personally don't receive government assistance, maybe we have at some time in our life, or maybe we know people who have, and we're not just talking about public assistance, but things like the way that our roads are funded, child care, Head Start, children's health insurance, Medicaid, all of these federal funding mechanisms are informed by census data, and so it's important for our state to make sure that everyone is counted so that those programs can be fully supported. I also just think on a basic level, and of course this isn't compelling to everyone, the census is a way that we participate in our government, just like we register to vote and we serve on jury duties and sort of do our civic duty. It's a way that we are included in the society in which we live. So I think it's an important part of being an American and living here in this country is participating in the census.
I think I could add just one thing too, Mark.
No, go ahead.
We're very fortunate in Cleveland that we live in a county which is the second safest city in terms of being free from natural disasters, earthquakes, tornadoes. But when disasters hit, be they natural disasters or man-made, the census information is used amongst a lot of first responders and FEMA and agencies like that to know, I think, and that's a very critical part, and perhaps will become increasingly so as we face more climate-related disasters. Sorry, Mark.
No, that's right. I just wanted to point out that, we talk about allocation of funds based on census data. It's not just the population data, it's also the data that's collected in that American Community survey that I talked about. So knowing how many people take public transit to get to work, for example, is useful for transportation planning. So you really need that good ACS data. The census actually is very short. It's a short form. It's very few questions. A lot of people, I think, that are hearing about the census that is coming are sort of worried that they're going to get this very thick form in the mail, and it's going to take them hours to fill it out, and it's going to be a big burden, and so why bother? I've got other things to do. Well, it's actually a very short instrument, very short. It takes, 5-10 minutes to fill out, depending. It's not a big burden, and again, it is the basis for doing all those other kinds of things in terms of collecting data that is then used by the federal and state governments to allocate funds for very specific services.
So knowing how important it is, we always grapple with this question of the undercount. I think the census has gotten better almost every time it does this in reducing that percentage undercount. But we do know that certain groups have much higher rates of undercount. Young children, Black and Latinx population. So I think, Mark, you have some data specifically about those who are most likely to get underreported or undercounted and what the net effects of that might be.
Yeah, I'm a data and graphic person, so I'm going to also have some slides here. I'm a geographer, so there's going to be a map or two. So let's talk about the undercount. A lot of people talk about the undercount. The undercount is one way of measuring how we miss people, but there's also something called omissions. So the undercount is people who were missed minus those who were double counted. Some people are actually counted twice. People may have more than one home, or you might have college kids thinking they got to fill, or their parents thinking they got to fill it out for their college kids at the place of residence, whereas the kids at college, if they're away, live away most of the year, may also fill out a form. And there are other reasons why there's actually an overcount to some extent. So the net undercount is really a sum of the people you missed plus the double count. So it's really not as useful as the omissions. So in fact, here's a graph showing since 1980 what the net undercount has been. It was 1.6% estimated in the 1990 census. It really dropped down to actually an overcount, an estimated overcount, net overcount in the 2000 census, and again, very close to a net of zero in the 2000 census. So maybe in the 2020 census, we won't have very much of an undercount, a net undercount. So it's the omissions that are really important. So omissions are a better reflection of who's actually missed. It's the people who should have been counted who were not. It's a simple concept. In the 2010 census, national emissions were 5.3% of the total population. In Ohio, it was 3.5%. So that's a significant number. That's much more than that 0.01 net undercount, right? That's an important number, and that's nationally, and it varies geographically, of course. So it also varies by type of population. So racial and Hispanic minorities had higher omission rates. That's not a surprise to anybody. Hispanic whites were only 3.8% versus the national 5.3%, but Hispanics were 7.7%, and African Americans were 9.3%. And renters, they move a lot, and you don't necessarily catch them with that questionnaire, or they're less inclined to think that it's important for them. For whatever reason, the renters are also less inclined or more inclined to be missed in the census, and that's 8.5% nationally versus 3.7% for people who own their home. And people in large cities are undercounted or omitted from the count. So here's a map by county in the state of Ohio showing a statistic that the Census Bureau produces called the low response score. It's a composite score. It's not just number of people missed or omissions, but it reflects omissions, okay? And so you can see Cuyahoga County up there in the upper right-hand part of the state, where the city of Cleveland is, for example, has a relatively high low response score, which is not good. And so the other urban counties of the state are also high. Cincinnati down in the lower left-hand corner, and Toledo up in the upper left-hand corner, etc. Mahoning County, where Youngstown is, also has high rates for a county. But let's drill down further, and this is a map that's actually printed over there on the side. You can go up later and check it out and see if you can identify the neighborhoods that you're concerned with. So this is the 7-county region of northeastern Ohio, and you can see that the higher low response scores are in places like the city of Cleveland, East Cleveland, Akron, Lorain, Elyria, and some other places. There's a corner down there in Portage County that is actually at Kent State University, and the students who are not responding to the census. And we also find that young adults also are missed more frequently than older population in the census. So this is a map that shows really where we must work the hardest to get the count up as much as possible, because these are the populations that will suffer the most when there's less resources dedicated to services for them, et cetera, in those communities. So it's really a map showing where we have to do the most work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Does anybody else want to add to that? That was a pretty visual expose of the areas that are undercounted and where we need, as Devante said, really to invest our efforts. Talking about university, that of course leads to a very important group. We have hundreds of students living in dorms and residences, what the census counts as grouped quarters. So Nadia, I wonder if you could just tell us, or others, about college students and maybe other people, people in shelters, prisons, other people that fall into that category the census calls group quarters.
Group quarters,
Yeah.
sure. So, well, thank you, Devante, for your very informal presentation, and thank you, Dr. Siebing. It was wonderful. We are bridging the gap in hard-to-count population. One of the hard-to-count populations that Devante mentioned is immigrant and multi-ethnic population, so I'm bridging the gap with that population. When it comes to student dorms, all student dorms are part of our group quarter operation, and group quarter operations is actually our special operation that addresses all non-traditional living situations, such as dorms or prisons or homeless shelters, maybe now I'm just yeah, well, that, as I said, non-traditional living situations. So how the students are going to be counted? During the month of February, so we already started reaching out to administrators of those group quarters, and they will be offered 5 ways or 5 options how to enumerate. So they will be provided with very specific information, and they will select which option is the best for them. Students who are living off campus, commuter students, they will receive their invitation in the mail just like regular population, and they should be encouraged to respond to the census and fill out a questionnaire just like regular population. So basically informing them and providing, educating them that it is important to respond, that would be the best way to address that population. When it comes to homeless shelters, again, in addition to homeless shelters, there's subgroup, which is service-based enumeration, and that's for people who are receiving some type of service, who are not living necessarily in a home shelter, and again, they don't have a residential, they don't have an address, or they don't, maybe they're staying with somebody else, but they're receiving maybe food or some other services. So we are collecting, and we actually reaching out to our partners, community partners, to collect the list of those places, so that our staff can reach out during the month of February and try to enumerate them and help with enumeration.
And of course, these traditionally hard to count groups, and that would include poor people, foreign-born population, and the homeless you mentioned. Sometimes it's really trying to emphasize the importance and what the benefit is to them. How to say our foreign-born and our homeless actually benefit from census data?
So one of the ways that Devante mentioned is having census forms available in 12 languages. Also, educational material is available in 59 languages. So almost like every language covered is covered by. So everybody can go online or get information what the census is really about. One of other ways is that we are reaching out to community members and faith-based community to reach out to immigrant population through their churches or places when they meet, get together, also to refugee centers, trying to dispel the myths about the census and try to reach them through people or services that, people who are working with them. So we are using the trusted voices of community and people who they trust to trying to explain the benefits of census to them.
Kate, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think what's so interesting and important about the work that Devante is doing and the work that a lot of organizers in the community are doing is that there are people who are leaders in our communities who understand the importance of everyone in their community being counted and included in the census. And they have taken it upon their own shoulders to communicate that to their communities, and because getting a complete count matters and will benefit their communities positively, even though those are often communities that have legitimate reasons that they may distrust the government. There are lots of things in our history that can cause people to have distrust, and so that's why it's important to have trusted voices within those communities to communicate just how important it is, because not everyone is going to trust the official representative from the census who's knocking on their door, but they may trust their pastor or their neighbor or the person on their street who's telling them why it's important for them.
And what I also just want to ditto to your point, Kate, is the importance of educating those trusted messengers. And it's great for you to have, the complete count subcommittees as well as their constituents and their community partners, but it's also equally as important to educate, those individuals too, because the last thing you want is for those trusted voices to also be ill-informed and sharing misinformation, because once again, that will just be it will be counterproductive as to what we're trying to do. So it's also just as important to educate not only those hard to count populations, but also those trusted messengers and trusted partners as well.
So on this issue of distrust, perhaps I can turn to probably has been one of those potentially controversial aspects of this year's census, and that was namely the proposal, now since abandoned, to include a citizenship question on the census form. And people said, well, it's in the ACS, why do we concerned about that? But of course we do have to remind ourselves that the mandate for the census is to count all persons, not all citizens. So that was knocked down, and a lot of groups opposed it, everything from my professional organization, Population Association of America, through other citizen groups. But in some ways the damage was done, and I think a lot of immigrant communities and individuals were very concerned and are therefore probably less likely to fill in the form, fearing that, especially in the current environment around immigration, that data, and perhaps not understanding the confidentiality issues of the census, could be used against them. People like to address that particular controversy, and how we might be able to work against that.
Well, the simplest answer, the question is not on the form. So that's actually good news. Again, just reminding them, or actually emphasizing that their data is confidential, and we are abided by law to keep everyone's personal information confidential. There's Title 13 that protects personally identifiable information, and Title 44 that protects it for 72 years. So knowing that is really the best tool, just having the information out there. And again, question is not on the form, so.
Absolutely.
Kate?
Yeah, I do think, we know that the question will not be on the form, and yet still that seed of mistrust has been planted in many people's minds, and a lot of people who maybe would have already been on the fence about participating, that sort of pushed them over of like, I feel really nervous about this, and so I'm just going to play it safe and try to avoid completing the census. And so I think that's where we have to be really compassionate and understand where people are coming from, and also communicate the information that I think it's helpful to have people from within those communities saying like, I took the census 10 years ago and nothing bad has happened to me as a result of that, or finding different ways to reach those communities with that message is important.
Nat, I don't know if you know this, but I think in some previous censuses, the precursors to Homeland Security and ICE actually suspended operations by kind of just trying to calm down the situation in the months preceding the census. Do we know that's going to happen this year?
No.
Probably not.
I worry about the opposite, actually.
Opposite.
Okay, I just wondered, because I know that was something that the government agencies worked out by way of just kind of calming down the environment so that people would be more inclined to answer and be less fearful.
But any information that enters our system is not shared but with any federal agency. So nobody has access to personally information. So once the data enters our system, it becomes statistical information. And that information, again, is not personal information, is not shared with any federal agency.
So, may I ask?
Yeah.
What happens if there's a disinformation effort just before the census?
You've just anticipated my question,
Ah,
so go first.
okay. So how do we respond? How does the Bureau respond? What kind of public messages can help allay those kinds of fears?
So I think we're talking about in an era of social media, which we know is a mixed blessing. It can be used to great benefit when we can disseminate, but there's also a lot of
we created actually
conspiracy
an
theory.
excellent tool online that is called Rumors About Census. So everybody can go online and just literally, if you just Google Rumors About Census and check and if there is no question, that if you can't find a question, you can actually type a question, and we will make sure that we will address that as soon as possible.
And I think to your point about the unfortunate misinformation campaigns that, of course, exist, and they will inevitably be there, it's a matter of us doing exactly what we are doing today.
Yes.
It is us being acting very proactively and making sure we are just deploying the most accurate information pertaining to the census that can more so combat those misinformation campaigns as well. So, and of course, as Nada just beautifully mentioned, there are a panoply of resources that exist that can provide you the most accurate information pertaining to the census and its importance.
And it's not always malevolent agencies. I mean, we all know, all of us suffer from survey fatigue, and we always get these pseudo-surveys coming from political parties, which we know really are, questions are oriented in a way to get us to a certain answer, and in the end they ask you for money. But there was one recently came out from the RNC that used the word census in its form, which I think was rather unfortunate, and maybe that's an example of terms being used in ways that it could either misinform people or maybe deter them from answering questions.
So I'm not sure that so there was...
It was the RNC sent out a form, but they used the word census in it.
The Republican National Committee.
Yeah, Yeah, so I think, we can probably expect to see just more of that as over the next couple of months, probably things that you'll receive in the mail and also things that you'll see online. I would anticipate probably that people will have links for you to click on from social media and things that look like they're taking you to the census, but that's not the case. And so I think it's important to keep an eye out in the mail for your official census postcard mailers that have the Census Bureau logo on them. Visit the website on that postcard and put in your information. And if you find yourself being confused about anything like that, come April 1st, visit your local library. They all have librarians that have been trained to help assist you and get you to the right website. I also think, the importance of us speaking with a unified voice about the truth about the census is really important. And now you all are here in this room. You didn't know you signed up, but you are also going to speak with that same unified voice. Every one of us has to be an ambassador to our family members. I said I was going to speak on IdeaStream yesterday, and my aunt was like, well, I'm not taking the census. And I'm like, okay, well, this is it. Like, if we can't do the work in our own families and on our own streets, then we can't do the work anywhere.
Absolutely.
And just having information, for example, speaking of homeless, we need to understand that homeless people are not just people being living, on the street. Let's say if you have a family member or friend who, fell in hard times and maybe staying with you for a time being, they get to be counted where they're staying on April 1st, even though they're not part of your family, but they get to be counted where they're staying on April 1st.
And sometimes terminologies we mentioned can be confusing. We mentioned a lot of our students are in dorms, so they are part of what we call the group quarters, but we have lots of other students who share apartments.
Yes.
And sometimes our younger students think that a household is like mom, dad, and the kids, whereas the census kind of a household, just 2 or 3 people living together.
Right.
So you can all fight out who's the head of household, fill in the
this-
form,
this-
as long as somebody fills it in.
And also, we were talking, I believe that Dr. Sealing mentioned about double count, right?
Yeah.
So this time, because we are utilizing technology, we will be able to catch those duplications. So let's say in a household where you have a student who is maybe in another city, living in a dorm, and if it happens that a parent fills out form, including that kid who's out, away in the college, and kid also, student fills out the questionnaire, we will be able to fill out catch that duplication. It's better scenario to fill both forms than not to fill it out. So that's really, great, very important to emphasize. I mean, personally, I have 2 students. One is in Columbus, the other is actually at Cleveland State. So he gets to be counted in our household. He's a Muir student, but the other kid is going to be counted in Columbus.
Yeah, we know the Cleveland State one's twice as important, but that's okay.
Exactly.
So a question for you, obviously every census, the mission gets bigger and bigger and larger every year, and yet Congress doesn't always keep up with the money. So it seems the Census Bureau is asked constantly to be doing more with less, like a lot of us. So how do you think now that the budget cuts to the Census Bureau's budget will, what impact it'll have on Census 2020?
I really have to assure you that the Census Bureau operational plan is it's actually accessible and it's online and it's public document, and the 2020 census is fully budgeted. So everybody who wants to check that, you can go on census.gov and search for 2020 census operational plan, and it's out there. So, but when, maybe this was I would say, spin in headlines in newspaper about budget cuts, because what happened actually, our model from 2010 has been changed because we are utilizing technology a lot more than what we did in 2010. That actually caused us to spend less money than when we spent in 2010. There is no need for huge storage facilities to store paper forms, because we are printing less paper forms because we are pushing for that online and phone response. So that actually caused us to redirect our budget in different way. So let me just again, for example, in 2010, we had 1 partnership specialist in Ohio. We had 1 partnership specialist in the entire state of Pennsylvania. Now we had 4 partnership specialists in Cuyahoga County alone. So we are shifting our approach, lessons learned from 2010, There was also a very extensive research study 2018, and that actually gave us hint that we need to shift our approach to grassroots effort and invest into partnerships. So we are trying to reach out to our local organizations and form local partnerships like on the ground level. So that's the shift and change.
And then also in tandem, what is also happening is that, to Nada's point about grassroots efforts, there are also a number of many grant opportunities that are available to nonprofits and community agencies as well as grassroots organizations to help to provide you the necessary resources to conduct a census campaign and to once again amplify it and to deploy those census strategies as well. So we can also talk offline about those opportunities as well.
So sometimes when I'm talking to my students, I say, the census is like going for a really, really big physical, and then other times you visit the doctor, they're just checking your pulse and your cholesterol or whatever is your heartbeat. Of course, the census is more than just the big decennial census. We have all the other operations. So does anybody want to just mention all the ancillary ones that, as Mark pointed out, depend on this initial base count?
Well, the most important one that I use in my day-to-day work is the American Community Survey, and as Mark mentioned, that is a much longer form that goes out to a sample of the population and really helps inform a lot of the work that nonprofit communities do, or nonprofit organizations do, and our public policymakers. It really undergirds a lot of how we assess need in our community and look at changes, and not just demographics, but poverty and income and housing and transportation, all sorts of things. So that's a really important one, and I do think that people sort of can see that form and be shocked by all of the information that the government is asking for them to give about themselves, but it sort of hurts my heart when I hear about people who are evading that form. So that's an important one that people need to fill out.
Yeah, and just to emphasize to the point, the American Community Survey is a sample. So we randomly select population to send or call for that survey. For the decennial, everybody has to be counted. And again, nobody is calling. So for the decennial census, nobody will call you. But however, there will be a phone number that you can call in.
It's really the United States class photograph or family photograph. I remember being in Maine, being contacted to participate in a panel. Was going to be contacted every month about information, and they said, well, tentatively saying, would you be willing to participate? And I said, oh, wonderful, I've always wanted to be asked. He said, we don't normally get that response. And I said, well, I'm a demographer, so I have a vested interest in all this. I mean, what is amazing, I think we should say, which perhaps not everybody appreciates, maybe certainly not as many of our younger. I can remember when I was using the census and I had to mount the tapes, and you had to write a SAS program to interrogate and get your data. This really is what we might call the democratization of the census, in that this information is available to anyone. I mean, you can go online to www.census.gov. You can get quick facts about your town, your city, your state. I mean, it's really been a revolution, has it not? And certainly for us end users.
Even that interactive map, Rome, that you can actually track
It's
and
geocoded.
take a look at the census tracts, and it's public tool. Again, census.gov/Rome, ROAM, and you can check response rates and also what's happening in every neighborhood.
It's not just we nerds that work with this stuff. This is available to anybody and everybody. And actually, your public libraries are a great resource as well. So I want to thank the panel for my questions, but now I think is the opportunity for you, the audience, to ask any questions. We have a microphone up here, or if you think you've got a loud enough voice, but make sure the panelists can hear you. Maybe identify who you are and if you represent an organization.
I'm Janice Ford of the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland.
Yeah, please use.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, maybe.
Can we bring that to anyone?
Hey, Sharon,
Do I
Should
have to
be
do
on.
anything?
No, it should be on.
we can pass it around.
Yeah, we'll make the others mobile.
I'm Janice Ford of the Cleveland League of Women Voters of Cleveland, who will be working with the census program. I'll be one of the people who are supposed to answer questions. There are two questions I have that I've never been able to get an answer to. And someone's bound to ask me. So, the
Now's your
two-
time.
The two are, the government is obligated to get this information. Is the citizen obligated to provide it? In other words, will he go to jail if he doesn't?
You want to answer? I can answer.
Mark can answer.
Not authoritatively, perhaps as somebody from the census, but it's my understanding that there is a law that says that are required to complete the census. No one has ever been prosecuted, however,
Exactly.
for not doing
All
so.
right.
But it is a law on the books. And as far as I know, there has never been a case in which the data that's been collected by the Census Bureau has been used against an individual or a group of individuals. I mean, one would expect that lawyers and the media, the reporters would dig for those kinds of stories and cases to report how the federal government has abused the census data. It has never been reported, as far as I know, ever to anybody.
I do believe there's an exception to that.
Well, are you going to talk about
Internment camps?
Well, the internment camps. Oh, okay, all right.
And
I'm
as a
sorry.
result of that, we have Title 33,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think so. I think that's the point
nuance.
is that there are examples in our history, such as when census data was used to find Japanese Americans and Japanese residents and put them in
During the
internment
war.
camps, and of course that sows distrust. But as a result, we have federal policy in place to prevent that from
Yes.
happening
Absolutely.
again.
We
And
also,
Seaman, this message comes from trusted voice. It has much more weight than when it comes from somebody from the government, because, you know, usually when we say that, it's always, you know, people say,
Pushback.
well, again, we don't trust you. But this is what we need to hear.
So I think you have your answer as persuasion, not punishment.
it has been done once, it can be done again, especially in this anti-immigration environment. Probably, I agree, it's probably safe, but there are going to be people out there who are scared. And I'm supposed to talk them into filling in this form. The other question I have is, if there is a question that they feel is dangerous to them to answer, will their census be counted if there is something not filled in?
Oh, you mean one question out of 5 or 7 is
One
not
question,
answered?
or maybe there are two
My
questions that they
official
feel they could be identified,
You can say.
and they're scared.
So the answer is that the questions which are not filled in are filled in by the Census Bureau to the best of their ability. So
That's
they
a-
will what's called impute the data based on a similar household, similar characteristics, for example. They will assume that there's that what the answer is on some of those questions.
But the person, if they feel really insecure, we can tell them they can leave one blank.
I'm not going to say that. I'm just simply saying
No
that
one will
if
say
it's
that.
yeah, if they don't complete it, the Census Bureau will impute an answer for them.
So it
and
will
these
be
are
accepted.
done statistically so that the data, when they're summarized by census tract or for the county or for the cities, et cetera, or for certain groups of people, they are statistically valid. So there's a very advanced technique of doing that kind of thing.
Okay.
But when you think
yeah.
of the questions that are left on this very short form, they're probably the most innocuous ones that we could have.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
very vague questions.
Yeah,
So it would be hard to identify someone based on the questions that are asked.
Any other questions?
Oh,
Hi, my name is George Costanzo. I represent the LGBT Community Center of Greater Cleveland, but I'm also on the Complete Count Committee. My sector is LGBTQIA plus youth, homelessness populations, and yeah, I believe that that's it. I think it's also marginalized populations. They just wrote kind of generally in my description. I was wondering, I have one very specific question, but it pertains to like a larger question. And that's, so with filling out the online census form, do you need to have a physical, like mailed invitation to fill out the census? Or can you log on to a portal and just fill out the information just on the online portal for the census? Like, and the reason I'm asking is because as someone who's supposed to help count homeless people, if they don't have an address, how are they gonna get an invitation to fill out the form? If they're living in a shelter, how are they gonna get an invitation?
There are two parts to this question. So, no, you don't need official invitation to fill out questionnaire online, because this time we won't have that code that is, required because of the online process. Now, people who are homeless, they won't be filling out, nobody else will fill out those questionnaires for them. That's why we are reaching out, that's our group quarter special operation, that we are trying to reach out to administrators of group quarters, or get locations of service-based locations.
So someone else will fill out the census forms
We
for
are
homeless people?
We are sending our staff, and they will work with administrators.
Because I know that there is a count that happens for the homeless one night a year, at least I was told by a representative from the Census Bureau, that one night at the end of February, the Census Bureau goes out and they count the chronically homeless.
So right now we are reaching out during the entire month of February. We are reaching out to, and if you have any locations, stay after this presentation. I'll share my information with you. I would be more than happy to send it, to our administrators. So we are reaching out, and then there will be 3 days: March 30th, 31st, and April 1st. And again, that's on the administrator. Or
I saw that on the website, but I
Yes.
was told something different by someone from the office. So
This
I'm
is-
glad that I'm getting this from you now, and I would love to talk to you in more
Sure.
in depth
Absolutely.
afterwards about this. But thank you for now. You've answered my question.
And I know that with the homeless, it's not only in shelters, but you're reaching out to tent cities,
Yes.
places where homeless might congregate,
RVs.
under bridges,
Yes.
et cetera. So there's a real effort being made, right?
Yes.
And once again, this highlights what I alluded to before, the specific scenarios and how the U.S. Census Bureau are deploying specific methodologies and strategies for each of those each of those populations. So of course, Nada just alluded to the service-based enumeration process for those who are unfortunately in the homeless part of the homeless population. Then you also have the group quarter enumeration process for college students, for example. So once again, they are being very intentional and strategic about their strategies.
I also think with youth, that population in particular, you might see like couch surfing or people staying with different people. If that's the case, then they would be counted where they are staying on April 1st within that household, and so that's important to get that information out as well.
So if I get youth in my youth program that don't necessarily have a stable living situation, or they can't talk to their parents about wanting to be counted for the census, they need to have an address to.
No, so I'm just talking about the specific situation of if they're, say, crashing at a friend's house, they would be on April 1st, they would be counted at that residence.
So I think that could be a real issue. I mean, if you take any public university like ourselves, Cleveland State, we know we have students who are homeless, who are hungry, and when they are living 1 week in somebody's house, couch crush, as you say. So I think that's a real population of interest in this institution. How to get those, especially if they're moving around from one friend's apartment to another, whatever. Any other questions? We got and then here.
Hello, my name is Angela Rush, and I work with an
I think-
organization.
As
Is
you
it on?
bring it up, you're a tall person.
Hello,
There you go.
my name is Angela Rush, and I work with a foundation, Alpha Omega Foundation, and I am questioning if we have people who are afraid of filling out paper and also the internet, and with scams and propaganda coming up, is there going to be something to confirm that they have completed the right form, and if so, what would that be?
Are you talking about feedback confirmation?
Yes.
From the
Yes.
agency?
That will be actually certificate of completion online.
There was a gentleman here, is it?
My name's John Eckerly, and I have a bit of a background in advertising, and what it appears to me is that the census is having a problem with, they kind of present the census as this is important for everything you do, but it doesn't address people where they are. And in the sense that even your literature that goes out to individual places is a generalization, where I think you'd be much more effective if in your partnership development you were engaging those people to produce literature that said, St. Herman's House of Hospitality needs you. This is important to us, which means it's important to you because you sleep here. In each one of those micro levels, you need to find the vested interest of that citizen. It's not perceived by most people as a vested interest that they complete the census. It's not what you want, it's how to motivate them to want to do it and see themselves in this census. And I think it's a fundamental problem with undercounts. I did some stuff with transit, and you're surprised that most of the people that ride the bus don't have email. It didn't even conceive to me when I developed it. I think that from their perspective, I just think you need to address that.
I am so sorry. What is your name, sir?
John Eckerly.
John, I feel like I owe you $1 for saying that. I completely concur to every single point that you made, and that is very much the reason why, like me and my partners, as well as our Complete Count subcommittee partners, were very intentional and spent months crafting the visual, as I mentioned before, the visually centric campaign. Like we worked with a lot of hard to count communities to understand that. Yes, we have a lot of information that is created and deployed from the U.S. Census Bureau, from the City of Cleveland, as well as Cuyahoga County's administration. But the unfortunate reality is that we did notice that, those who are in those hard to count communities did not see themselves in that literature. And so that was very much the reason why we spent so much time and so many hours doing those technical assistance and working with those community partners and nonprofits to say, like, hey, first and foremost, who are the people that you work with? Who are those hard to count communities? But lastly and most importantly is, what information do you need that will be translatable to those communities to understand the importance of the census? Because of course, everyone uses transit, everyone understands the importance of health and well-being, everyone understands the importance of food, and apologies for me for getting the last point, but all in all, you have these 4 variables as well as a plethora of other ones to be utilized as a catapult to have those sort of conversations and essentially build that trust in those populations as well. So I completely agree with your remarks.
If you take CSU right now, research.
Yep.
Every professor here should find it. Every students wander around, but it just says the census, and that's just not enough.
Absolutely.
That's why we rely on our local partners,
And
and that's why we started with this partnership, grassroots efforts to literally.
no blame.
Yeah,
Just,
I'm just, yeah.
I agree.
That's a great point.
My point's just that it needs to be targeted to particular needs for particular audiences and bottom up.
True.
And what you also are alluding to as well is whether you're doing like voting work, democracy work, but specifically the census work that we're discussing today, is we want this to be very seamless in your existing body of work, which you just talked about. So you have professors, you have researchers at CSU or at other anchor institutions, or any institution for that matter, or nonprofit or organization. But essentially, you want to have this information you want this information to be a seamless transition or a seamless addition to your existing body of work, as opposed to it being too additive or too laborious for you to have to do your 9-to-5 job and your 9-to-5 work, but also have to add on this other, big boat of the census and trying to get people to understand that as well. So once again, I agree and thank you for your
And it
comments.
goes back to education. So again, something new that didn't exist in 2010 is called statistics in schools, because we are trying to reach out to younger audience, and again, through the young kids, reach out to their parents. So we developed program called Statistics in Schools, and fully equipped website with supplemental material for teachers, so that we can actually start implementing information about census from the early age. So literally we start from pre-K and it goes to 12.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your comment. And we have another question here.
Hello, my name is Brad. I'm a Urban Affairs alumnus. My question, mainly to Dr. Salling, is, what methodologies are used to ascertain whether the data gathered is good?
Good question. So there is a methodology that the Census Bureau has to, after the census, they go out and on a selective basis test and see whether or not they got the data correctly. They don't do it everywhere, obviously, because that'd be just repeating the census, but they do it on a selective basis, targeting in a sampled way communities, and they go out and again canvass and collect other data to verify the data. So there is a very rigorous effort to verify the data I came up with on the undercount, the net undercount. That's based on going back out and collecting more information. The data on the low response rate is actually based on a lot of different data that they collected, primarily through the ACS, but they also have administrative records, birth records, death records, other statistics from federal agencies, et cetera, where they can get counts of people, et cetera, so that they can compare them and evaluate them. So it's a pretty rigorous effort to make sure that the data are accurate.
And Mark, in that, I think my understanding is that cities have the opportunity to challenge data if they think it's been incorrect, if they've been undercounted, overcounted. Most people undercount are worried that there's an opportunity to challenge the data at a certain time after the census has been completed, correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So again, municipalities, and cities and regions, states have an opportunity to do that. Got some more. Two at the back. We've got somebody here at the podium. Come on.
Hi everyone, I'm Ashlyn and I'm a disability advocate at LEAP, and I'm also part of the Complete Count Committee. So I'm from California, and I know that California has 187 million for state funding for their census, and I know that Ohio has gotten 0 from state funding. And with philanthropies such as the George Gunn Foundation and also Cleveland Foundation, they've given a lot to support the grassroots and nonprofits. But what have you seen the impact with Ohio not funding for the census?
So in case anybody couldn't quite hear that, some states have put aside considerable sums of money to help supplement the work of the census or any shortfalls. Ohio has not. And I guess the question is, what are the repercussions of that?
I think it's unfortunate that we didn't get any state funding. Localities are dedicating, the city and county are dedicating resources to this, and like you mentioned, philanthropy is stepping in to fill those gaps. And then I think also we've seen community members and organizations who just say, like, this is important to us, we're going to do it even if we don't have any funding to help pay us to do it. It's unfortunate that that's the case, because money helps with things like ad campaigns, and there are things that actually cost dollars, not just manpower, woman power, human power. So it's unfortunate. I can't compare to other years. This is my first year sort of being involved in this work. I don't know if Dr. Salling, I don't know if you've seen changes in efforts or that sort of thing, but that's a good question.
I think we have 2 questions at the back. please.
This is so much less sophisticated than that last question, but what is the general turnaround time for when the results are published? I cannot remember from the 2010 census, but I know our deadline is July to, as you said, to answer.
So once the the data are crunched by the Census Bureau, they are mandated to produce data for the state total on population by the end of 2020. Okay, and that's for the purposes of reapportionment, so that the number of congressional seats each state gets will be dependent on that distribution of a population by state. Then the data are further crunched down to smaller units of geography like census tracts, et cetera, and by census block, in fact, and which are smaller, and produced by April 1 of 2021. And that's the data then that is the neighborhood level, et cetera, and municipal level kinds of data.
And we're all going to be watching those congressional seats with interest, because Ohio is likely to lose one, and the big states like Texas will probably get 3, Florida 2, and then North Carolina. In other words, the South and the West we can expect to gain, and the Midwest and the Northeast. Well, actually, interestingly, California will probably lose a seat. You might say, well, California's going to lose a seat, but its population growth has slowed down, so relative to other states, it's not growing as fast, and it'll be overtaken by the Texas and Floridas. So the redistricting folks who will draw new congressional districts, new Ohio House and Senate districts, and new wards will all start after April 1st or about then. Some of the data for some states will come out before April 1st, but that's the deadline. And they'll start their efforts to redraw all our political boundaries, so pay attention. One here, oh, yeah.
Hi, I'm Kevin Leeson with the County Planning Commission. As you all know, April 1st is Census Day. I just want to let you know that the county's Complete Count Committee is planning a census Saturday on the 28th, March 28th, before the Saturday before April 1st. The plan is to spread out across the county and reach out to people where they are, plug into existing events, possibly set up tables at museums, community centers, et cetera. So the plans are still being developed, but if you're interested in participating, please come find me and we will keep you informed.
Okay. Lady here in the red sweater. Oh. Well, we've got more than one red sweater.
So regarding the undercount, overcount, when the census adjusts the figures, are those adjusted figures utilized for, population counts for, the population for Ohio for redistricting and so forth, or is it the actual raw data? Understand what I mean?
So I think I might be speaking out of turn, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm not afraid to be wrong, which I was earlier. So I think that they are the final counts after the public review and any effort to challenge the numbers, and that's at the municipal level. And then they may have to adjust based on that the data as well for within the municipality. If the municipality has said you missed a housing development here or an apartment building, then that might also affect the counts for that census block or census tract as well. But after that, those are the numbers. Yeah.
Did we have another question at the back there?
Oh, hello. Hi, my name is Xin Yuan. I'm from Midtown CDC, community organizer in Asiatown. So because of the English proficiency limit transportation internet access, is it legal for us to assist people in Asiatown to fill out the form?
Oh, if you're not an official census agent or partner, is it legal for them to assist people in filling in forms where there's a language proficiency issue?
So we have some initiatives throughout the community to throw like census parties where now there are two options actually, and this is something that we didn't plan on, but now it's in process of development, which is, we called it MQA, or Mobile Questionnaire Assistance. So in 2010 we had questionnaire assistance centers where we had stationed like centers to help out push that, like response rate. Now we will have, again, we are collecting a list of locations that we can send our staff to help with assisting people take the questionnaire or fill out the questionnaires. So they will have mobile devices, phones or tablets, and that's one option. Another is maybe the local libraries. So I know that all libraries partner with us, and they will be helping. But again, nobody can help them. But again, can I assist them? I mean, they cannot fill out form for them, but they can assist them, because we are trying to protect the privacy of their information.
Oh, so how we are able to refer them to?
So let's say if by providing computers and devices that they can fill out a form, that's one option.
And the language assistance.
And the language assistance,
Absolutely.
right. And we have material is actually questionnaire form will be available in Chinese. I believe it's simplified Mandarin, but I have to double check on that. But definitely Chinese is included.
Maybe if they need more information, they could contact the census office or any of the...
Oh, yeah.
But just for clarification, there's nothing illegal about somebody at the respondent's request of translating for them to help fill out the survey, but the person is supposed to fill it out themselves.
Yes, yes.
Oh, yeah. Another question is also have the same concern about skipping the question in the questionnaire. Because people living in Asia Town, they might have different immigration status. They have a concern being reached out. So for the section of telephone number, like if they say, oh, I don't want to fill this part, is it okay? Or, I don't know.
Will they be required on our telephone?
I didn't hear it.
Telephone number, yeah, well, there is a question about, you're asking about phone number?
Yeah.
Yes, there is that question about to provide phone number only, and we want to have the phone number only in case if something is wrong. So nobody again will call, but again, if there is something wrong with the form.
Like we understand, but they might don't understand.
They might,
like if they want to skip it, is it okay?
Again, we have to encourage them to fill the form entirely. That's my official response.
Our census persons can't answer that question, but do as you may, I guess it would be my response.
And I think once again, we are emphasizing the importance of like the nuances of what it means to be vulnerable and to complete the census. And that is what your question is highlighting. And so the same way if you're conducting voter registration is very similar to the same way, there's a sense of trust building that needs to take place when you do have those people, those trusted messengers and those trusted partners present to like help build that trust for the applicant who will be completing the census. So it is a little challenging, and the only thing we can say is just do the best that you can. And once again, we are here as trusted messengers, as trusted resources to help provide you a much more accurate response to those experiences.
We have time for just one more question, if anybody has any. If not, we can, our panelists want to add anything, or
Well, I just want to invite everybody, because one of the hard-to-count population are young children. So Cleveland is actually host city for our big event, Counting Young Children, on February 22nd at the Science Center. So admission for children and families, if they come for this census event, the admission is free. There will be a lot of activities for children, dance, yoga, all health. We're trying to encourage health and well-being of children, so please come and visit us.
Help us not have an undercount of those children under 5 that we usually have. Well, I'd like to thank our panelists for a very engaging and comprehensive review of all the different questions. I'd like to thank our audience for all the questions, and just as we exhort people to vote and say you get the government you deserve, you'll go out and fill those forms and get the census that you deserve, and all the important repercussions of having a very good census. So thank you all for being here today, and please join me in thanking our panelists.